Have you ever looked at your life and thought, I'm capable, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but yet, why do I feel off? On paper, things make sense, but internally, something feels disconnected. It's like your energy isn't where it used to be. And the longer that this feeling persists, the longer it lingers, the harder it becomes for us to ignore. And this is what I mean by this idea of being stuck, of stuckness, of being stuck. It's nothing dramatic. It's not dysfunctional. It's just this sense that what once was is no longer, right? So the way in which things may have been flowing for you, they're no longer flowing in the same way. And so in this video, what I will be sharing with you are my 4 stages of feeling stuck. This came about through my work with the high achieving women that I work with through my coaching. And the importance of really understanding and knowing these stages is that once you understand which stage you're in, what starts to happen is that whatever it is you're experiencing, it becomes clearer. And then also what typically starts to happen is that the path or the idea of maybe what might be next, that starts to show itself to you as well. And so in my work with these high achieving women, I've noticed that this feeling of being stuck, it doesn't necessarily show up for every woman in the same way. And so over time, this is how I began to see these patterns that are showing up, the way in which these women experience this sense of disconnect. And this may very much depend on whatever's going on in their life in that particular moment and what they may or may not be carrying with them. And so this is what led me to identify these 4 stages of feeling and being stuck. And I don't want you to consider these as being labels, because it really is just a way for you to help to start to make sense of what's actually happening and going on with you and what's happening beneath the surface. And so you may find that you may flow through many of these stages throughout various times of your life. So in other words, in one season you might be in one stage, another season you might be in another stage, and this is perfectly normal. The whole idea for this is just for you to understand and really get clear on where you are now in this present moment. And so as I walk through these stages, I want you to listen and to see if anything sounds familiar with you. You may recognize yourself very clearly in one of the stages, or maybe you might notice pieces of yourself throughout several of the stages, and that's normal. Again, this isn't about trying to diagnose or fix anything or trying to get something right. This really is about simply noticing what is happening right now in this present moment for you, so that you can then start to craft a way for you to move forward with more clarity and less friction. So my first stage is what I call the detached drifter. And who is my detached drifter? So this is the season where you're mostly just reacting to life instead of really actively being and feeling a part of it. So like nothing's necessarily dropping. So in other words, you're handling all your responsibilities. Nothing's necessarily changing at work in terms of the way in which you're showing up for the most part. And what I mean by that is you're still delivering what you need to be delivering on the job. You're also right. So therefore, you're meeting all those expectations and you're keeping things running. But what starts to happen is that emotionally, there's a distance there. There's that disconnection with self. And practically what's happening is that there's very little movement going on. There's very little action going on because you're really not taking steps towards really doing something that really matters to you. And it's not that you don't care. It's that maybe you're just simply in that maintenance mode. And so you've been there for quite a while and you've been acting on it, and maybe things start to feel as though, oh, if I were to maybe take that next step and or act on what it is that I might think that I want, it starts to feel maybe perhaps unrealistic to you. Maybe it feels a little indulgent if you were to go after more. And also maybe it's just the simple matter of, it's like, well, that's just more work, right? And so therefore you keep going through the motions. You're not creating, you're not necessarily choosing, you're not moving forward with what it is that you want, you're just getting through. And so over time, this might start to feel as though you're really just living your life on autopilot. And the thing to recognize is that with this stage, it's not necessarily that there is some problem that you need to solve. Again, it's just really wanting you to recognize this description of where your energy is and where your attention is right now. So that again was the detached drifter. My next stage is the aimless achiever. Might help if I get all of my beautiful technology right for you. So my aimless achiever. So what happens with the aimless achiever? So unlike the detached drifter, this is a woman that's very active. So she's doing a lot. She's accomplishing a lot. She's staying busy. But busy doing what? That becomes the important question here. So from the outside, it often looks like they're a success. But internally, there's still that disconnect with self. So in other words, this is a woman where she's moving, but without a clear sense of direction in terms of what actually feels like her own. Much of her energy is spent chasing goals, meeting expectations, or maintaining momentum that was set in motion some time ago. And so there's a lot of effort going on with this individual. They're very competent, but there's very little satisfaction. Sometimes I like to think about my aimless achiever as this person that is throwing spaghetti at the wall, but sometimes they're not even waiting long enough to see if that spaghetti even sticks before they move on to the next piece of spaghetti that they want to throw against the wall. So what starts to happen is that, because there's so much effort going forward, right? Because again, this person is doing, they are in action, they are in momentum. They start to notice that all of this effort starts to feel a little heavier, right? And it's feeling heavier and there's no reward to it. And so this is the person that tells herself that, she should feel grateful. She may wonder why perhaps, achievement seems so far off, why it doesn't land perhaps the way it used to. And again, it's not because she's doing anything wrong. It's because she's more focused on this idea of doing without really pausing long enough to ask herself whether or not what she's doing still matters to her. So she keeps striving, not because it feels aligned, but because stopping will feel uncomfortable. Because who is she if she's not this active, busy person taking care of business, right? And so this stage, it isn't necessarily about the idea that there's a lack of ability or motivation. It's simply this description of what happens when the action continues, but we're not necessarily connected with what it is that we really truly want for ourselves. So that again was my aimless achiever. My third stage is my purposeful procrastinator. So with my purposeful procrastinator, and this is where oftentimes I would find myself. So this is the woman who actually knows what she wants, right? So in other words, there is this sense of clarity happening here. But what starts to happen is, again, there's going to be that vision. Oftentimes there is a plan. But despite having all this clarity, despite having all of these plans, there's very little action going on. There's very little movement going on. This is the person who may find herself thinking about it. She's going to revisit it. She's going to refine it. And then she's going to wait. And then she's going to think about it some more. She's going to revisit it some more. She's going to refine it some more. So as you can see, right, this is that person that oftentimes they get very much stuck in their head. And again, it's not because she's not motivated or unsure. It's because the stakes feel so high. Because what if she were to get it wrong? What if it doesn't work out? Because she knows that she wants more. And she knows that she's deserving of more. But again, the fear, the self-doubt, that pressure of possibly getting it wrong, that starts to plague her. And so instead of moving forward, again, she stays in her head, preparing, analyzing, rehearsing. So on the surface, this might also look as though maybe this person is just very patient or they're very discerning, right? They're really going to take this time to really figure out perhaps what's going on with them. But over time, all this waiting, all it does is it quietly becomes its own kind of stuckness. Because underneath all of this waiting, there's oftentimes a frustration. Because she knows, as I said, that she's capable of more than just sitting and standing still. So this stage isn't necessarily about confusion. What it is that basically the clarity is there, but the actions, they feel too risky for her. So the work begins in terms of getting beyond that, right? So that was my purposeful procrastinator. My last is my empowered explorer. So with my empowered explorer, so again, this is the fourth stage. So this is that person where they have both the clarity and they have the action. So in other words, they're clear on what it is that they want for themselves and where they're going, and they're taking action towards it. So in other words, this person is no longer stuck in their head. They're no longer maybe just throwing spaghetti at the wall or whatever the case may be. But this is that woman who's making very intentional choices. She's taking steps that reflect who she truly is, the person that she is wanting to be. And so she's letting go of many of the roles and expectations that no longer fit her. And many times she's experimenting. She's exploring what does fit her, what does feel right. So therefore, there's momentum on there. And there's nothing rushed about this. There's nothing performative about this. This is just her sitting in her real authenticity as she's working towards really creating the life that she wants for herself. Now, at the same time in this particular stage, you may not have everything figured out. So it's not necessarily a matter of you have all the answers, because in this stage, what's happening is you're still learning, you're still adjusting, and you're still stretching yourself in terms of what may be next for you. And because this growth is happening in real time, what starts to happen is that many questions sometimes start to naturally begin to surface. And so therefore, you know that you're not quite at the finish line. And so again, with my empowered explorer, this is the woman that she's moving forward with clarity, agency, and intention, but she knows that there is still room for more growth and development and support. And so as you listened to these, I want to know, and I will ask you, and by all means, feel free to put any of these in the chat. But I'm wondering if any of these actually resonated with you. Did you see yourself in any of these stages? Or maybe you noted pieces of yourself, again, through in more than one of these stages. And again, I want you to recognize that this is very, very much normal. This isn't about checking the boxes with any of these stages. And I want you to understand that these stages are not necessarily linear. So it's not like you have to go from one stage to the next. Again, it all really hinges on what is happening in your life at this moment, the things that perhaps you may be carrying, and all of these may perhaps speak to this level of where you are in terms of feeling stuck. And the key with this is, again, this tool, my reasons for coming up with these 4 stages, it's really all about awareness. It's not about awareness so that you can take some sort of immediate action, but it's really about awareness so that you can begin to get honest with yourself. And so, where you are today, it doesn't say anything about where you're capable of going. So again, I am curious to know, where do you think you are? Where do you think you fall? What particular stage might you find yourself in? And by all means, feel free to add that into the comments. But one of the things that I also want you all to know is that to help you make sense of this, I've also created a very short quiz to help you identify which particular stage you may be in. And that's called the Stuck to Soaring quiz. And I'm going to have a link to that in the description. I'll probably also put a link to that in the comments. And so one of the things that I always like to ask folks is that, typically when I describe the 4 levels and then invite them to take the quiz, I always like to see if whether or not there's a match in terms of where they think they are as opposed to what the quiz may actually say that they are. So again, by all means, I invite you all to go out there and take that quiz. And once you take that quiz, what you will also do is you will also receive a reflection guide that will help you to identify what might be your next step towards getting through the particular stage where you might be finding yourself. So with all that being said, I hope that you found this helpful. I never introduced myself. My name is Demetria. sometimes referred to as Dr. D. And my role and what I like to do is I'm really all about helping high achieving women break through some of these patterns that we find ourselves in regards to us feeling stuck, and really to help them get the clarity that they need, and also supporting them in terms of getting into action, in terms of going after what those things are that they really want for themselves in their lives, so that they can stop paying these hidden costs that we're paying just because we're in that misalignment. So with all that being said, I appreciate you sitting here for this video. And if you were here and if you're here to the end, by all means, please subscribe to my channel. And I will see you next week for the next video.